All right, hello, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Nathan Stoll, and I'm the chair of VLab. VLab is an all-volunteer 501c3 nonprofit that for 30 years has connected innovators, investors, experts, and curious minds to explore disruptions near their inflection points and to discover insights from founders before their household names. Tonight's event focuses on disruption in telehealth, which has seen sudden growth during the COVID-19 pandemic. It has been around for decades, and now with many previous barriers removed, has seen acceleration of innovation and adoption. It's the top funded category of new investment, and our panelists tonight will help us understand whether telehealth is here to stay. In a moment, I'll introduce our moderator, who will explain more and introduce our panelists. First, I'd like to thank all of our donors and volunteers. Many of you made donations tonight. Thank you for providing the support we need to run the organization. And to all our volunteers, particularly our programs chair, Ravi Prasad, as well as Shailandra Landi, and to our volunteer event team, who I will talk to you about now. Ksenia Zavagatseva, who is our chair, with Deval Shah as co-chair, Jerry Fuqua, David Ham, and Dr. Jack Higgins, who I'm also excited to be able to introduce as our moderator. Dr. Higgins is a family physician who lives on the coast near Half Moon Bay. He leads 3 nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to improving healthcare for the poor in the United States and the developing world. The organization that's most relevant to tonight's topic is the Global Telehealth Network, or GTN, where he is the founder, president, and chief medical officer. Their volunteer physicians offer free online consultations for patients in underserved areas, beginning in East Africa and Northern California. So without further ado, Jack, please take it away.
Thank you, Nathan. I want to welcome everybody here and thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. I hope that you'll find the event interesting and inspiring, and I hope it'll help you to achieve your personal goals. I'll start by explaining who I am and why I'm here, and in the process, I'll provide a brief history of telehealth. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. I was born in Minnesota. Okay, just kidding. Let's jump ahead to about 28 years ago, when I was practicing family medicine in Chico, a small city in the Central Valley about 3 hours north of San Francisco. In 1992, a friend heard about the AT&T video phone 2500, and he asked me whether it would be possible to use that. Sorry, Bob, I don't think I have control of the slides yet. There it is. I hope. It's still not going. Sorry, folks, technical difficulties, please stand by. Now we're on. Okay. A friend in 1992 heard about this AT&T video phone, and he asked me if it could be useful for healthcare. It offered a 2-way video, and it cost only $1,600 per unit, which is about $3,000 in 2020 dollars. I told him that a 1-inch diagonal display was really too small to be useful, and anyway, I didn't see how you could take care of patients without being in the same room and touching them. But that night, about 3 a.m., I was lying awake thinking about possible ways that 2-way video could be helpful if the quality were better and the price were more reasonable and the screen were a better size than what we had available. And then we discovered a software program that would allow you to connect your desktop computer with somebody else's computer over telephone lines. At that point, the internet didn't have adequate bandwidth to carry video, but that meant that I could view a patient's image on my big old CRT monitor with resolution that wasn't really great, but it was good enough to solve many problems. And meanwhile, I reflected on the fact that we have 5 senses, and that sense of taste is something that I had never done in my 20 years in practice then, and 48 years now. Never tasted a patient. And actually, I've never smelled the patient or really made a difference in making the diagnosis. So that left basically sound, sight, and touch as being the things that would be important for us in medicine. So we decided to give it a try. We set up a pilot project in primary care telehealth up in Northern California. Mad River is a tiny village, just at crossroads really, in the Trinity Mountains in Northern California. They had a clinic that was staffed Tuesday through Friday by a nurse practitioner. But on Mondays, the only person there was the paramedic who ran the ambulance service. So every Monday for 1 year, if somebody walked in expecting to find help and the paramedic couldn't fix it with a Band-Aid or an ice pack, He'd call my office on the phone, and as soon as I could get free, I'd fire up my computer and connect with him over phone lines. So every patient I saw on a Monday returned on Tuesday to see the nurse practitioner. I wanted to be certain I hadn't screwed up, because this is something really new and we were making it up as we went along. But it turned out my diagnosis and treatment plan were right every time. And out of the 80 patients that I saw on Mondays that year, only 4 had to make the 4-hour round trip down to the emergency department in Fortuna, that red circle on the left there over by the coast. The other 76 patients were able to avoid that trip. And the project was so successful that after that 1 year, we were able to hand it off to the emergency department at that hospital in Fortuna. But meanwhile, we began to think about how many places in the world are medically underserved. There's limited resource countries, what we used to call third world, and then developing countries, and now low and medium resource countries. They need help. Disaster areas, conflict zones, refugee camps, rural and urban areas in the US are all places where there's just not enough help there much of the time to provide the care that people need. Some doctors serve as volunteers with medical missions in faraway places or closer to home and free clinics like the ones we run here in the Bay Area. Many others say they'd like to help, but they can't leave their practices, or they can't accept the expense and the risks that are involved with travel. These doctors need a solution that lets them volunteer without traveling. So in response to that, we founded something called the Global Telehealth Network. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. And we believe that we can reduce health disparities in medically underserved areas around the world. And something just happened, Bob. Let's see if I can get it back. Okay, that's it. We think that we can reduce health disparities using telehealth, because volunteer doctors and psychologists can use computers in their office or their home to see patients almost any place in the world. Health workers in underserved areas, when they encounter patients with a complex problem, can go to GTN's website to request consults. Once they've uploaded the patient's history and physical findings, our system will match them with the most appropriate volunteer physician or psychologist somewhere in the world to provide the needed consultation. So we're currently planning 6 pilot projects in East Africa, in Kenya and Uganda, including 2 in small hospitals, 2 in rural clinics, and 2 in schools where a nurse provides care for the students and staff with no backup available for a physician. So after we work out the bugs in a variety of settings, and there will be bugs, we hope to scale across Africa and other continents, building partnerships with other NGOs and ministries of health. Meanwhile, we soon plan to begin providing care as well for free clinics in the Bay Area. Rotacare Bay Area is another nonprofit I've been working with for 19 years. We operate 10 free clinics in the Bay Area and provide care for people with no money and no insurance. All the clinics are staffed by volunteer doctors and nurse practitioners. And when they need help from a patient or for a patient with a complex problem, it's often difficult to find a specialist who's willing to provide a pro bono consult. Now they'll be able to connect with one of our volunteer specialists through the GTN website. About 15 years ago, I spent a year at Stanford University in a social entrepreneurship fellowship program. I knew that I wanted to focus on the nonprofit sector, but I realized that some things can be accomplished better by a for-profit company backed with equity investment, like the 2 startups you'll be hearing about in a few minutes. That's why I decided to create a family of associated companies that can work together for mutual benefit in a hybrid, or what we prefer to call a tandem business model. In addition to our existing company, we're going to be starting 2 for-profit social enterprises as public benefit corporations that are designed to qualify for certification as B Corps. Each will offer products and services to large addressable markets, at the same time contributing to the common good and providing financial support for GTN's nonprofit activities. We anticipate that both of the benefit corporations will generate social and environmental returns on investment in addition to the financial ROI, and it should be very attractive to impact investors. I just use 3 terms that many may not be familiar with yet: benefit corporations, B Corps, and impact investing. So if it's not familiar to you, even if they are, please consider attending our next VLab event in December, where that'll be the topics we'll be discussing. Well, I wasn't aware of it when I began seeing patients in Mad River, but telehealth had already been around for decades. mostly used by the military at that time. And the adoption of telehealth had been fairly slow over the years. By the way, some people distinguish between the terms telehealth and telemedicine, but most of us use them interchangeably, and there seems to be a gradual shift in favor of telehealth. Well, it's been growing slowly, and there have been challenges due to adoption, that is, due to regulations and reimbursement issues. But the COVID-19 pandemic has created a tremendous surge in interest. And now it's recognized as really the only, or at least the safest way to provide care, while protecting both the patient and the provider. For example, at Sutter Health, which is a very large nonprofit, Dr. Chan's going to be speaking to us in a few minutes here about how his team ramped up their telehealth capability. They increased their volume from 20 video visits per day to 7,000 per day in about 4 weeks. That's a fast ramp up. Well, meanwhile, Teladoc Health is the largest telemedicine company in the US. They went public in 2015, and in 2019, they had revenues of over $500 million. But this year now, in just 2 quarters, they have revenues over $420 million. So that is astronomical growth. The stock price has gone up 2.6 times since January, and it continues going up a few bucks every day. So obviously, the stock market is very happy with the increase in volume that they're doing. Estimates of the current global market for telehealth are all over the map. And I've seen ranges from $22 billion to $45 billion right now. And I've seen predictions of annual growth rate from 23 to 30% for the next 5 years. And there was one market research report that was especially optimistic, and their projected market size is $267 billion by 2026. I'm not at all sure that's going to be the case. But it definitely is growing fast, and all of us who are in the space are looking forward to a fast ride. So I'm going to close with an explanation of how the event's going to work. First of all, Dr. Younggren, first is going to be Cory Kidd talking about his company, Catalia Health, which uses a robot as a patient interface in homes of people with chronic problems. Then Dr. Brad Younggren will tell us about his startup company's text-based user interface that gets people started in the system before they see a doctor or a nurse. And the 3 other panelists, Dr. Chan from Sutter Health, Dr. Sanghavi from San Mateo Medical Center, and Sunny Kumar will all give very brief opening sessions. And then we'll go on to questions that I'll be asking all of them that I prepared. And for the most part, they don't know what those questions are going to be. But then after that, we'll have a half hour left to spend on Q&A from the audience. And I want to encourage the audience to enter your questions in the Q&A box there in Zoom. And we'll get to just as many as we can by 7:30. Then at 7:30, we're going to go to breakout rooms for those who want to stay around. Now, you don't have to. The session's over at 7:30. But we will have each, I believe, of the panels will be able to stay for a half hour until 8 o'clock. And there'll also be a breakout for just sort of a mingling, networking sort of thing for folks who don't want to talk to us, but want to talk to each other. So feel free to jump into that. And now I'll introduce Dr. Cory Kidd.
Great, thank you, Jack. Great introduction, and I think it leads nicely into what the rest of us are talking about tonight. So let's see if I have control. There we go. So I'm going to start off with a quick introduction to Catalia Health and myself. So I've spent my entire career, about 25 years now, working at the intersection of technology and healthcare. So on the academic side, have been focused on artificial intelligence and psychology. I'm going to talk in a couple minutes about how we bring those together at Catalia Health to improve patient care. Catalia Health itself is a little over 6 years old now. And this is really building on work that I had done for the prior 12 to 15 years, focused on chronic care management and patient engagement. And so I thought it was very interesting to see the phone that you showed a minute ago, Jack, and the prices at that time and how they've changed over time. And there's a good analogy in what we do at Catalia Health in terms of our patient interfaces. And I'll talk in a minute about why we use this robotic interface with patients. But when I started my first company, which was about 12 or 13 years ago now, building one of these robots cost thousands of dollars, right? So it fit right in with the expensive price of the phone. The robots today in 2020 are basically cheap enough that we don't even charge for them. They're just a device that we put in our patients' homes, and it's part of the interface that we provide in our programs. But what we're really focused on are outcomes, as is everyone else on this panel. And I think that's a key thing that we're going to talk about tonight in understanding, how we really improve care. And so the focus of my career has been, how do we really leverage technology in a way that can successfully engage patients in treatment over time? And so what we focus on is building programs for patients that do leverage technology in chronic care management. And the underlying challenge that has driven all of this work is the understanding that, at a macro level, we have a large percentage of our population, roughly half the adults in this country and most nations around the world, dealing with a chronic disease on an everyday basis. As a healthcare system, we're pretty good at the acute stuff, right? If we can get a patient to where we can see them, and traditionally that's been in a clinical setting, like we've heard a lot over the last few minutes, telehealth has really started to make a real impact there, but they're still, interacting directly with a patient. Now, the challenge with chronic conditions is a lot of what really are the issues in terms of the long-term care are happening, Friday evening at 7 p.m. after my doctor's office closes for the weekend, or at 3 a.m. when I wake up with some strange pain and I'm not sure if it's, something I should worry about or not. But it's the stuff that happens day in and day out, day after day, that's really a challenge to deal with. And that has really been the focus of what we have done at Catalia Health over the last half dozen years, as well as the work that has led up to this. And so the center of this slide, the programs are really what we focus on. So how do we build comprehensive care management programs that are available for our patients 24/7? And there's been a lot of technology that has been designed to be autonomous and do this. Over the course of my career, I've built some, early CD-ROM based applications, and then those moved on to the internet. In the last decade, it's been our, smartphones and tablets where we deliver these. And there have been literally hundreds of thousands of these kinds of solutions built over the last few decades. And even the best ones tend to fail in the same way, in that they don't engage patients either initially, or if we're good enough to do that, after a few weeks or at best a month or so. And when we're really talking about these chronic conditions that we need to be managing for years or decades, a few weeks or a few months don't really make much of a difference. And that's been the core focus then of what we do in terms of how we deliver these programs to patients in an effective way. So we do have this cute little yellow robot that we put in patients' homes. Now, doing a demo of this over Zoom can be challenging. I'll hold one up briefly. You can see, well, of course, Zoom's going to make the head disappear here. Hold this up briefly so you can see that, this is a real physical thing that we put in our patients' homes. There are plenty of videos available online if you want to see how this works. But I want to describe two things really briefly in terms of our technology. So one is why we use a robot. And a good analogy is talked about by the challenge that we're facing here in trying to do a meeting like this, an event like this, that in a different time, we would all be in the same lecture hall talking face-to-face. Afterwards, instead of a separate Zoom networking session, we'd stand around and talk to one another. And in the clinical practice of medicine, this is really a key, right? Seeing our patients face-to-face is different than any kind of virtual interaction. And we know a lot about the psychology behind that. If we were face-to-face with one another right now, as opposed to looking at each other through a screen, we'd be more engaged. We'd create a stronger relationship. It turns out when you talk to someone face-to-face, you find them more credible, more informative, more trustworthy. And looking across a lot of different interfaces that I've used over a couple of decades of building these applications, one of the things that I have worked on is understanding each of those from a psychological perspective. So I did my PhD at MIT in artificial intelligence and psychology, and it was really looking at the psychology of these different interfaces. And there is a difference. When we put this little robot in front of a person or a patient that can literally look them in the eyes while it's talking with them, it turns out we get those psychological effects of face-to-face interaction. And when we care about that long-term engagement, this makes an enormous difference, having that physical presence. The core technology that we focus on building is artificial intelligence algorithms that generate a conversation on the fly for a patient. So again, kind of tough to do a demo over Zoom, but what's happening here is this robot is actually having a conversation with a patient, and it's coming up with that conversation on the fly. So we're not asking a patient, hey, answer the same 4 questions, about your heart failure that you did yesterday, and so I can report that information back to your doctor. It's, oh, good evening, good to see you. Yeah, how are you feeling? Yesterday you told me. And really, it's about coming up with that conversation as you go that gets tailored to that patient at that point in time. So on the screen, it shows a little bit of information about our models. I'm not going to go through that right now, but what's happening in the background is we are actually modeling that patient to understand what's going on and how we deliver a conversation to that individual at that point in time. And the focus here and what makes this work is we bring together a number of different things in what we deliver. So we really start with the psychology of understanding that individual. And there's a human analogy for everything that we do. And a large portion of the psychology that we focus on is what we would think of in a clinical setting as good bedside manner. Right? And we don't mean that that clinician has more or less clinical knowledge than someone else. We mean that she or he is better at connecting to that patient in front of them and conveying information in a way that is accessible to that patient. Now, of course, we leverage artificial intelligence to do this. This is really how we scale this across large numbers of patients. And one thing that carries throughout all of our work is the design. So the robot itself, we brought in IDEO, the large design firm. They're one of our early investors and partners in designing this device. And there's a lot of work in usability. For example, the setup process for a patient who gets one of these is take it out of the box and plug it into power. That's it. There's no menu after that. It starts talking about 30 seconds later and learning about that patient. And of course, what is fundamental to all of this is the clinical practice that we bring to bear. We have a clinical team that builds some of these applications. We have partnerships. For example, we build a heart failure application with the American Heart Association that we now deliver to patients. But the interface then is something that's really simple for any patient to use. Now, as a result of this, one of the things that we are able to do is get a lot more information about what's going on with that patient. I'm going to talk briefly on the next slide about our business model, but we do actually a lot of work in the pharma world with patients on specialty therapeutics, particularly in immunology and oncology. And what we are substituting for are programs where a patient might get a call once a month from a nurse. When this device is in the patient's homes, we can talk to them every day. In fact, for our average patient, we talk to each one every 48 hours. So there is a much greater frequency of interaction. With a typical patient, we spend 30 minutes to a few hours a month in total talking to them. And what's important is we're talking to them at the points that matter. This is a tool that's accessible to them whenever they need it, and we're able to start to get a much deeper understanding of what's going on with our patients day to day. Now, as I mentioned, we do a lot of work in the pharmaceutical space. We do a lot of work, particularly in specialty pharmaceuticals around immunology and oncology. We do have a cardiology program on the market as well. So we cross over a number of different patient populations. From a business model perspective, we fit into what's already in the market. So the core of our business is we get paid on a per patient, per month basis for providing these care management programs. And there are other pieces alongside that. So we are working with some of the large pharmaceutical manufacturers like Pfizer and others to carry out these programs. And where we're going right now is really expanding beyond these disease states. So we are a relatively young company. We had our first commercial launch just last year. We're already crossing over a number of disease states. We're starting to expand our patient population within those and across those. And one of the big areas of focus right now is really creating high-level partnerships to get this to more patients so we can make a bigger difference in their lives. And I know there are a number of you who are in the audience who are focused on the same thing. So I look forward to connecting with you in the networking session and the questions and afterwards. Thank you.
Cory had a longer talk, as you were aware, and everybody else is going to be keeping it down to about 2 or 3 minutes. So we have time for questions. I just wanted to point that out to the audience that there will be time for questions. Next, Dr. Younggren is going to tell us about his startup company's text-based user interface for patients. Go ahead, Brad.
Thanks. So I'm Brad Younggren. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at 98.6, and I'm an emergency physician by background. I've been with 98.6 for over 4 years now. 98.6 was founded right around 2014-15 timeframe to really try and revolutionize the patient experience And what we have built is a 24/7, 365 on-demand text-based service that patients can access whenever they want. We deliver care to adults and pediatrics age 1 and up. And the focus of the company has really been around this North Star, that we believe that no one in the world that everyone in the world really should have access to primary care medicine without having to make a financial trade-off to get it. And that, while still observing the fact that we're in a primary care crisis, within a few years we'll have a shortage of over 30,000 primary care doctors, puts immediacy around the work we're trying to do to give patients in the United States and ultimately around the world access to primary care medicine, high quality, low cost, and very accessible. So what we have built is an app-based service that initiates via text, although you can use phone and video, so it's certainly not exclusive, but the vast majority of patients prefer text. And the whole context of the platform we built was that we wanted to build a medical service that met patients where they're at. One, patients expect on-demand services across other aspects of their lives. We wanted to bring on-demand to healthcare, and we wanted to increase the capacity for patients to text with physicians, and that's the approach we took. And from the patient experience side, what that allows is you to engage with physicians in non-traditional settings. About a third of our patients will engage physicians on the bus, in between meetings, things of that nature, so they don't have to take 2.5 hours out of their day to go into a brick and mortar visit that can be fully accomplished via virtual primary care. And so that provides good patient satisfaction, and it gets increased patient engagement, which ultimately does lead to better outcomes. We all know that having patients that are engaged in their primary care medicine is incredibly valuable. The last point I'd like to make, because I want to keep it short, and I'm timing myself here, is that the investment we've made on the physician side. So we hire our own physicians or full-time employees, and we're not an AI-based symptom checker, because that doesn't really impact patient care in the way we want to. We built a platform that leverages AI and natural language processing, machine learning to help physicians deliver better care, faster, at higher quality, and also improving the physician experience. So all that's really important to us at 90.6. And so we've been growing across the country. From a business perspective, we sell our product. Our primary markets for the last 3 or 4 years have been the employer space as well as the plan space. And we've been now selling into health systems, and we have a direct consumer offering. You can go down and download the app and pay $30 introductory price for 3 months of unlimited access, because we want patients to engage in the service. And so that moves us away from the fee-for-service model, which is really critical to engaging patients in their healthcare. And I'll stop there and look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Dr. Younggren. Next, I'll ask Dr. Chan to introduce us to the large nonprofit hospital system that many of us in Northern California, including my family, depend on for our care. And it's a system that I regard as being outstanding. Dr. Chan?
Thank you, Jack. And thanks everyone for being here tonight. I have the pleasure of introducing Sutter Health. We are a large integrated delivery network in Northern California. We have 24 hospitals, several hundred clinics, caring for about 3.5 million patients annually, with about 50,000 team members, including about 14,000 clinicians. So pretty big organization. And with, like everyone else, COVID provided this unique opportunity and stimulus to change the way we practice medicine. So, in fact, it was my birthday when this happened. When it was at my birthday week when we got this announcement that from the governor that we would be shutting down many services, and so we had to quickly adopt and adapt to the situation at hand. As Dr. Higgins mentioned, we historically had very few video visits. We had initially stood up a walk-in, what we call Sutter walk-in care, which is essentially a advanced practice clinician-based clinic, and so we were doing retail visits that way. But with a couple of different factors, key amongst them were really the changes in the government regulations with regards to telehealth as being a big change during COVID. So we saw vast expansion of reimbursement for telehealth services. We also saw removal of limitations for both originating site and distant site. That is to say, historically prior to COVID-19, we had a number of limitations about where our doctors could practice medicine virtually and where they could deliver it to. So there were some limitations, for example, in Medicare that prevented our physicians from being able to deliver telehealth services to our patients in certain zip codes. So, and a bit about our story. So to get this done, essentially we recruited over 200 team members across the organization, many of whom I still haven't met actually, so that there's a virtual story in that too. And we essentially configured over 4,700 iPads quickly, because we couldn't, we had the option of trying to install cameras and other technology throughout our health system, but we realized our doctors were at home as well. And we couldn't imagine, we also tried to envision a world where our physicians could be ubiquitous. They could be at different care sites, they could be at home. And so we decided to use a mobile option for them to be able to deliver virtual care. So we enabled these devices. We centrally deployed them remotely to the local sites. We had standard trainings of all virtual. Historically, we've done all in-class training. So we actually turned it very quickly and created all on virtual trainings of 5 per day to fit in the clinical schedules so that the doctors could be able to still see patients as they could and take care of things. And then over a matter of a few weeks, we launched everyone up. Some observations, Jackie was very kind and mentioned our 7,000, max of 7,000 video visits per day. I will reflect on a couple of things. One is I think the work is not done. It's just the beginning. We are still trying to figure out what are the best practices, the best way to deliver care this way. We're also trying to figure out what are the other enabling technologies that you need to be able to meet the full need of our patients. So I think that portends to things like remote patient monitoring, other tools, digital therapeutic programs, things of that sort that I think will fill in the full care continuum that will ultimately need to take care of people virtually. And I think the outstanding issues going forward is what's going to happen post-pandemic, or actually during the pandemic. Are the waivers, the federal waivers that have enabled much of these things, will this continue? Will the flexibility of being able to deploy these telehealth solutions, regardless of site, for example, persist? And will there be adequate alignment of incentives for us to be able to care for people in the way that we've done? I will say that it's been incredible to see. I should mention our initial plan was a 2-year deployment prior to COVID-19. So 2 years became 4 weeks very quickly. Let's just say that.
Wow.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Next sector, Sanghavi will offer the perspective of the public sector. We wanted to have a balance here between the private sector, like Cory and Brad, and nonprofit sector, called the social sector, that's Dr. Chan and me. And so we asked Dr. Sanghavi to talk about the public sector in the county health system where she works and I live.
Hello, I am Alpa Sanghavi. I am from San Mateo Medical Center, and I'm Chief Quality and Patient Experience Officer in San Mateo Medical Center. Just introduction to myself. If you can change to the next slide, Nathan, thank you. So I did my schooling, including medical school, back in India, and I did a residency in OBGYN. And then I came to this country about 25 years ago, where I did my residency in LA County Hospital. And then I moved here to Northern California, and I've been with San Mateo Medical Center for the last 20 years now. As you can see, San Mateo Medical Center is a county system of healthcare. And our mission is that we partner with our patients to provide excellent care with compassion and respect. We serve all the underserved population of San Mateo County. We have one small hospital, about 100 beds, And we have about 10 satellite clinics spread out throughout the San Mateo County. We serve approximately 60,000 patients, and most of them are Medi-Cal and primarily the health plan of San Mateo Medi-Cal population. And then we have a small population of Medicare and then without any insurance. If you can go to the next slide, this is our numbers basically. So we are a public hospital, again, as I said, small acute care hospital. We have a 30-bed SNF or skilled nursing facility. Again, very small ICU, 7 beds. And still we have a kind of baseline structure of any healthcare system. We do call ourselves integrated healthcare system. Again, compared to what you just heard from Dr. Chen, much smaller population and much smaller budget, of course, compared to Dr. Chen. So the kind of patient population we serve, and I'll give you some perspective about us, our patient population and televisits. So just like everybody else, as COVID came into our life, we had to very quickly switch from in-person visit to telehealth. We were doing about 5% visits as telehealth before all this craziness started. And pretty much within weeks, we switched to the level that about 70% of all our primary care visits were telehealth. We pretty much scrambled and got laptops for many of our staff. Quite a few of our staff were working from home. We still also had quite a fair number of staff coming to our clinic buildings and providing patient care when the patients were at home. What has really, really helped our patients a lot, I'll give you a little background of the kind of patients we have, right? So our patients are very special. We take care of most of the homeless patients, most of the homeless population in San Mateo County. They have to travel by multiple buses to get to us. We also take care of all the farm workers out along the coast in Pacifica and many day laborers. And in order for them to come to see us in person, they usually have to take the whole day off from work. And this basically pretty much impacts their wages. If they don't go to work, they don't get paid. And telehealth has been amazing in terms of meeting their needs without them having to really take time off from work. So some of our patient populations have really embraced telehealth much, much better than we had ever expected. In fact, our no-show rate has gone down in certain clinics because, it's a lot easier for patients to just visit with their providers using telehealth. Other population is, again, we have a senior care center, and a lot of times seniors, they need to depend on their children to take them to work, take them to pay, doctor's visit. And again, sometimes children have to take time off from work to bring their parents to the visits. And again, they love televisits. So those are the big advantages of televisits for our patients. What really matters the most to our patient population is technology, which is very easy to use. Most of our patients do not have laptops or computers in their homes, so they rely on their smartphones. And whatever platform we use, very, very important that they are able to use it without any hassles, and with just one touch of the finger, they are able to just get on to see their doctors through televisit. So I'll stop there and hand it back over to Jack. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. Now we'll turn to the venture capital perspective. Dr. Sunny Kumar will tell us a little about himself, about GSR Ventures and what they're doing in telehealth.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jack. Again, my name is Sunny Kumar. I'm a Stanford-trained physician, an entrepreneur, and a partner with GSR Ventures, which is an early-stage technology-focused venture fund looking to lead Series A and Series B stage investments. At GSR Ventures, I oversee our healthcare technology portfolio, where my core responsibility is to find, select, and invest in transformative healthcare technology companies. And when I say transformative, I mean companies that are able to take a process in healthcare today and improve it not by 10% or 20%, but really drive efficiency gains of 2x, 3x, 10x, in some cases, even 100x or more. As part of my introduction, I'd like to answer or help answer two questions that you may have. One is, what is happening in the venture world with regards to telehealth? To answer that question, I pulled here some data from CB Insights that covers the investments that have gone into the telehealth sector broadly in the US over the past 6 years. What you can see here is that from 2015 to 2017, quite a sizable amount of money went into this category. About $1.5 to $1.7 billion was invested into early stage companies. But beginning in 2018 and 2019, you saw a significant jump, about a 50% increase from those numbers that was largely driven by new technologies and new modalities of care that drove to greater efficiencies. In 2020, not too surprisingly, that number has skyrocketed again. And even just in the first 3 quarters, we've seen that number jump by over 50% to $4.5 billion, with likely ending up over twice what we saw in 2018 and 2019 by the end of 2020. Now, the real question is, why is that happening? One answer is obvious. Of course, COVID has driven unprecedented demand for telehealth solutions. But the second is a little bit more subtle, and in my opinion, perhaps even more interesting, which is that the telehealth technologies being developed today can drive that transformative impact that I referenced earlier. If you look at the bottom left of this slide, I'm sure all of you are familiar with a traditional clinic visit or telehealth 1.0, which is functionally creating a Zoom call with your doctor. If you look here at some of the metrics that I've included, you'll find that across some of these domains, in particular the cost to the patient and the time for the clinician, these are actually roughly equivalent. Now, there is a lot of value to telehealth 1.0. It's safer for the patient in that it reduces their exposure risk, and it actually reduces the amount of time the patient has to spend taking an hour to 2 hour visit, including a commute time, down to about 20 to 25 minutes, including a little bit of a wait. But at the end of the day, the cost and the time for the healthcare system is still roughly the same. What gets me really excited is that shift to telehealth 2.0, which is what we're seeing happening in real time today. In this world, the time for the patient is still a little bit improved, coming down from 20 to 25 minutes to 10 minutes, which is actually a sizable improvement. But where you really are starting to see advances are in the cost to patient and the time for clinician, dropping down visits down to only 3 to 5 minutes of clinician time and dropping that cost down to $20 or $30. Going forward, we're going to see these types of solutions augmented by artificial intelligence, and that's going to create even another massive leap in efficiency. The time for the patient may be a little bit shorter, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, but what really, really gets me excited is that we can now drop the time for the clinician, not to 0, but to perhaps below a minute per visit, which allows the cost of care for a patient to drop to almost $0. That unlocks an entire new paradigm of how we deliver healthcare in the US. And while these are not sharp categories, you can see some of these transitions happening even here among my co-panelists, with Sutter and San Mateo successfully navigating that transition from traditional visits to telehealth 1.0, and my co-panelists, Cory and Brad, helping lead that telehealth 2.0 and telehealth 3.0 transition. So looking forward to talking more about this and answering any questions you may have about the future opportunities in this space.
Thanks, Sonny. I'm going to proceed with some questions now. And I want to start with both Cory and Brad, actually. What are the challenges raising money for a health tech company? And what do you think makes a health tech company attractive to investors? And I'm starting with that because so many of our audience are, in fact, entrepreneurs and investors. And this is a question that hits that interface. Cory, you want to start?
Sure. I think one of the big challenges is related to the speed at which this industry moves. We've talked a lot about what's happened in the last 6 months, but that is definitely an anomaly. Building and growing a telehealth company or remote patient monitoring or care management or anything around this space takes a long time. And getting, the deals done with customers in the healthcare space at a pace that shows the growth needed for investors is certainly one of the challenges. And I think that when we're trying to change anything in healthcare, that of course is difficult as well, right? And that compounds these challenges in showing, as a small and growing company, that you really can have an impact and make inroads into changing healthcare.
Thanks, Cory. Brad, what are the challenges and what do you think makes a company attractive?
I think in general, digital healthcare right now is at a very attractive stage. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic crisis certainly shined a light on the opportunity that exists and all the shortcomings in our current healthcare system that need innovation across multiple different dimensions. The traditional challenges, I started in the digital healthcare space back in 2010, CMO for the first FDA-approved smartphone company in the United States. And back then, the differences were even more pronounced where it was difficult for investors to understand who the market was that you were going to be selling to. Was it the health system, which operates on an annual cycle, which is a very challenging place to enter in as an entrepreneur, to get into the annual budget as an example? Are you selling into the health plans, or are you going into the direct consumer market? And I think at the same time, what happened is that all these traditional channels morphed a bit, right? You saw health systems starting to build ACNs and health plans purchasing provider groups. And it became more challenging to define what those channels were and who would be going to market with. So I think those were the challenges. But certainly the appreciation and growth of the digital health space over the last 5 years has been profound across all dimensions: telehealth, AI. Even I saw someone commenting about AR/VR. We're seeing tremendous growth in the AR/VR space, especially in the context of medical education. A massive impact. So I think those are the traditional things that I observed in the market, and as an entrepreneur in 2010. And there's a lot of changes going on right now that are really a positive change for supporting entrepreneurs who are looking to make a difference in healthcare.
Thank you, Brad. I'm going to ask a question of Dr. Chen now. A lot of big health systems seem to be typically rather slow in adopting new technology and more reactive than proactive. And it seems like sometimes they only do it when there's no other option. That's not certainly true for Sutter in many ways, in that, for example, El Camino Hospital has been, I think, a number of times been listed as one of the top hospitals in the country. And I'm familiar with that because that's where I get my care for the most part. But I wanted to know what you're doing at Sutter to adopt technology proactively and getting ahead of the curve like you are.
Thank you for your question, Jack. Look, we take care of a lot of people over lots of different environments. In fact, over 100 communities throughout Northern California. So trying to scale up solutions for that broad swath of people it can be, it's certainly a rewarding endeavor, but sometimes can be a challenge. And we do have incumbent workflows and other things to try to figure out. There is this analogy, of course, if you're trying to repair the plane as you're flying it, right? So I think we have this challenge of really maintaining the quality of care that we deliver in traditional ways and trying to innovate at the same time. In that regard, we're very fortunate to have a very forward-thinking CEO, Sarah Crivens, who's empowered us to really think if you will so call outside the box, to think of new ways to deliver care. So, for example, we've partnered with a German company called Ada to provide AI-based symptom assessment chatbot functionality to take care of people, to meet their needs, even if we're not on the phones, for example. And we have seen with COVID-19 a tremendous rise in the utilization of tools like that, because at the end of the day, we're not looking to replace doctors, we're looking to empower them. And our patients are seeking navigation, the ability to find the services in a convenient way and the right way. Because of course, if you're a sick person and you need advice, the worst thing that can happen in my mind is you get the wrong advice about where to go. And then the frustration of not being able to get the care that you need. So our goal ultimately is to service people in the way that they need and be right, every single time. So that's sort of and reduce the friction of healthcare, because there's tremendous, as everyone on this call will note, there's tremendous friction in healthcare today. And I'm just excited to figure it out. We've got a lot to figure out. So we we are definitely engaged in sort of an innovation sort of mode to try to look for new solutions.
Thank you. Dr. Sanghavi, you working with another medium-sized, I guess you'd call it, health system that's in the public sector. And you talked a little about how telehealth's impacting the care of underserved populations. I want to know what some of the challenges you're facing beyond the ones you already mentioned in providing care for folks that don't have the financial resources that many of us do.
Yeah, thanks, Jack, for the question. So yeah, as I mentioned, first and foremost, the technology being really, really simple to use, especially our patient population, they do not have access to a lot of things that we just take for granted. And it could be something as simple as even internet access or having access to computers. So technology that is portable, that does not cost anything more to our patient population. Other big challenge we have seen in just last 6 months that we have switched to telehealth is integration of video interpretation services. So when about 50% of our patients are monolingual Spanish speakers, we also have multiple other languages in our patient population, and a lot of our patients do not speak English. So we've really seen the challenge of integrating video interpretation services to our telehealth platform. And we're pretty much in the process of evaluating other telehealth video interpretation services because we need to have something that really matches the telehealth platform that we are using. So these are some of the things that other people may not even think about because we just take it for granted that everybody will speak English. So these are some of our main challenges, but in general, I think telemedicine has definitely helped our patients big time.
Sunny, you talked a bit about where the market's going these days for telehealth. I think the folks who are in startups are wondering, what do you look for when you're deciding to make an investment in health tech companies, especially in the telehealth space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there are probably three major things that we're looking for. The first is, are you solving a large problem? And what I mean by a large problem is one that affects a significant number of people and from a resource perspective, takes up a significant number of resources in the US. There are many, many problems that you can solve that are important, but maybe don't come into that category of large. But when you really want to have a transformative impact, that problem has to just be so significant that any sort of change around the edges is going to actually lead to significant improvements for society. The second, related to what I said earlier, is that once you've identified that problem, can you actually drive a huge impact in that sector? Like I said, what I'm really excited by is not by a 5% or 10% improvement, even though that can be significant. What I really want to see is, can you drive a 2x, 3x, 10x, or even more improvement within that sector? And then the last is, have you thought about how you can actually implement that solution in a way that will lead to adoption and scalability? I think one of the biggest challenges that you've heard from some of my co-panelists is that healthcare in general is a very difficult spot to innovate in. There's a lot of internal reasons why things move slowly. So can you actually build and structure a startup that has a solution that is well suited to be able to scale so that you can have that big impact in that big sector? Those are the three things that I would look at for every single company that I meet.
I'm going to go back to Cory again, and data privacy and confidentiality is such a big issue these days. And you're gathering presumably some data with the robot. And I'm wondering, who owns the data of your patients and what happens to it in respect to the clinical practice? Who gets it and how?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, security and privacy are extremely important. And, from the perspective of the technical systems we build, kind of one of the foundational things that we think about, one of the things that we think about in the US is, of course, by default, everything is HIPAA compliant, right? So we have a set of regulations that's a starting point. In terms of the ownership, it really depends on a particular application. So, what we build is a platform that gets used in a number of different ways, in commercial care management programs and in pharma. Often that data is owned by the pharmacy that's managing that patient's care. When we roll out programs like we've done in heart failure with Kaiser Permanente, that data is going into their clinical systems. We have applications in clinical trials where it's the clinical research organization or the pharma company that's going to own de-identified data about those patients. So there's a variety of answers, and it really depends on a particular rollout. In general, with everything that we do, we try our best to fit into the existing healthcare system and the models in terms of ownership of data. So while we're getting a lot more data, the nature of that data is very similar to other types of things that we collect. And so we're not really trying to change how that is used or owned or delivered in clinical practice.
Brad, I wanted to ask you about reimbursement. You mentioned a little bit about the business model, and I wanted to dig in a little deeper and ask what you see as the advantages and the challenges involved in your model.
Thanks, Jack. So, I mean, one of the reasons that I was really excited about joining 98.6 back in 2015, when I started looking at the group that the CEO was putting together, was we know as physicians that the current fee-for-service model isn't working to improve patient outcomes. We've known this for quite some time, that it's counterintuitive for patients in the sense that they aren't encouraged to seek care multiple times if they aren't sure what the outcome could be, because there's additional costs that get layered onto it. So the approach we've taken is providing a subscription model for the patient where the costs are known up front. It's whether it's a 3-month subscription or an annual subscription, or in many instances on a PPO plan fully paid for by the employer. They can come into 90.6 for a simple question instead of going to a search engine. They can come in for an acute care medicine visit for them or their family, or they can come in for chronic disease management, for a follow-up for labs. It doesn't really matter. And when you take that sort of cost of impact away from patient engagement, what you really do is sort of flip it upside down, and you put the patient at the center, and you allow them to sort of engage not only in their sickness care, but drive towards this notion that we all talk about, which is wellness care, which is what we're driving towards as physicians, is helping patients, encouraging them and catalyzing them to improve their wellness. So we're not reactive. I'm an emergency physician by background. My whole practice is reactive in the ED. We're dealing with patients who are in a bad place. They need acute medical interventions. We want to try and create a health system that avoids unnecessary ED visits, not from a utilization perspective, but that certainly increases costs, but improving outcomes so they don't need to be in the ED in the first place.
Great, thanks. We're down to just a couple minutes before I want to start switching to the audience questions. So I want to ask both Dr. Chan and Dr. Sanghavi to give me 1-minute responses to the question: if you were to advise a startup and what to focus on in telehealth right now, what would that advice be from your perspective?
So look, at the end of the day, it's all about workflow. So, and that seems trite, but boy, it is tough it was tough being a doc in person, and as my doctor colleagues know on the screen. So any startup really needs to understand in depth the workflow of our clinicians. In fact, I grow tired of these, I will say, some innovators who say to me, look, if you only change your workflow, my startup solution will work. And I'm like, thanks. Really? Thanks. So I don't know if there's any general topic, but the whole idea is really, roll your sleeves up and understand our workflows and make it much more efficient for us to deliver care. That's the bottom line, because there's no quality of care without access to care. So.
Great, thank you. Alpa, can you do it in a minute?
Yeah, I would say one size does not fit all. And really understand where the patients are and meet them where they are. After all, it's all for the patients. So just try to understand their needs and understand where they're coming from. And if you try to just meet their needs, it'll be more successful.
Terrific, thanks. And I'm going to ask for another quick answer from you, Sunny, for this last question before we go to the audience questions. What concerns do you have about the future adoption of telehealth? What could be the downsides?
That's a fantastic question. I actually would refer a little bit to what Dr. Sanghavi mentioned, is that the most important thing, or perhaps my biggest concern, is making sure that these solutions are delivered with equity in mind. I think, especially in the Valley, we can take a mindset where technology always comes first. The reality is that across the US, millions, tens of millions of people don't even have access to something as simple as broadband internet. So when we build a solution that's telemedicine oriented, that sets up a Zoom call like we have here today, how do you make sure you design that solution such that everyone has access, or at least some form of equal access to that solution, and that we don't leave people who don't have that access further behind than they currently are? I think that should be part of every solution's design from day one.
Okay, thanks. First question I have here from the audience is for Alpa, asking, are you seeing underserved populations being marginalized from telehealth because of their lack of access to technology?
So yes, the kind of technology that we heard from a lot of our startup entrepreneurs, I don't really see our patient population being able to access that. Currently, the kind of telehealth we are providing is basically video or telephone visits, where actually it has helped our patient population, because a lot of them, when they were not able to take time off from work, they were missing their doctor's visit. Whereas now, with the option of telehealth, they are actually engaging a lot more with us. But again, there is a certain level of technology with which our patients will engage, and then when it comes to a different level of technology, it's very hard. So it has potential for increasing disparities in healthcare if we really don't focus on the patient needs and don't meet them where they are.
Great, thanks. Several people asked pretty much the same question about remote patient monitoring, asking, in case of telehealth, how can I send temperature, blood pressure readings, heartbeat from a remote house to doctor's office? That's a toss-up. Anybody want to answer it?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to take it. I'd say I'm a device convert. My first 3 startups were medical device companies, and now I've moved into the software side. So, but I still have a deep connection with the impact the devices can have in the delivery of care. One of the things I heard from as an example of when technology may not be working correctly is talking with my cardiology friends about some of the impact or lack thereof of these direct-to-consumer ECG devices you can buy in the market. The problem is not only an acquisition of the data, but it's how do you interpret the data? The physician is not being reimbursed for the data, and it's put in a big pile in front of them, not in a way they can consume in a very efficient fashion to make clinical decisions, right? You don't want reams of virtual paper shoved in front of the doctor. You want to say, what can you do for me, with this data that I'm providing you? So the real impact around device connectivity is companies or platforms that are taking those data sets, aggregating them in a way that can create intelligent information, not only for the patient, but for the physician to create actionable information to impact outcomes. And that is a lot of the work we're just starting to see in the last year or two is really moving from just, oh, you have a connected blood pressure device and you have a connected scale, to what is the impact of having those devices at home towards your health and outcomes. And I think that's a big area of opportunity and growth. It's going to be leveraging, AI data sets to improve and sort of support physicians' efficiencies around providing actionable data for patients.
Great, thank you. Sunny, this one is directed at you. Somebody is asking, and I'll quote, do you see any investments happening in preventive healthcare? I'm not sure if they mean, are you seeing them happening now by other people, or are you seeing you investing in preventive care?
Absolutely. Fantastic question. I think everybody here knows that preventative care is where all of the money should be going. I mean, if you were designing a system from ground up, you would put as much money in preventative care and just smaller pools in traditional medical care and then more critical care. The US system is obviously the opposite, where we spend the vast majority of our dollars on critical care, interventional procedures, et cetera. And I think the reason why, to go to a point that Brad made, is that we have a fee-for-service system, one that doesn't quite reimburse on value. Now, there are efforts being made to transition institutions to value-based care, but it's slow, it's challenging, involves a lot of policy. But there's a second solution to that, which is, can we drive the cost of value-based care so low that even at a challenging reimbursement model, you're still creating a tremendous amount of value. And as a result of that, which I believe is happening because of a transition to telehealth 2.0 and telehealth 3.0, I do believe there's going to be much more investment into preventative care. And even a fund like ours is actively investing in that space now today.
This is a question for both Albert and Alpa, working in health systems. And the question is, with all the emerging technologies that are out there, how do you scan the tech landscape and evaluate new products and services? Albert, you want to start there?
Sure. So I already tipped my hand a little bit with regards to workflow, right? I mean, that seems to me is key. Also, I do look to the quality of the relationship built with patients. So can these solutions, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all in this for, is to build these relationships with people. So I'm struck by how people can build relationships with TikTok, but they don't build relationships with our health systems. And that just strikes me as odd. So that's a big area of focus for me. And yeah, so I think that's yeah, and frankly, any of these efforts is not about buying a product. It's about forming a relationship and a collaborative partnership with any innovative companies. So that's what it's all about in my mind, finding quality leaders who understand our space, who can be partners in developing solutions for our patients.
Thank you. Somebody's wondering, and so am I, how are any of you measuring patient outcomes before and after telehealth? Yeah, how do we know that things are working for the better in terms of actual metrics? This is a toss-up. Maybe more than one person can answer this one.
I can go a little bit. So one of the things we did is after launching our telehealth service, we actually took a consumer-based approach to this. We actually are measuring a net promoter score because we think we should really think of this in sort of the consumer realm. Our net promoter score of our telehealth service is 83. So we are very proud of that. And I think that doesn't reflect our tech. What it reflects is that we're able to connect our clinicians with their patients and they value that relationship. That's what I think it is. But that's our approach.
I think one of the things that really attracted me to coming to 98.6 was around this notion of quality. When I looked at the telehealth space at the time, what I observed was large companies that were using video-based services which don't record the visits, and then are using, traditionally locum tenens physicians who are working for 10 different companies. And so what I was really excited about was the notion of building a technical-based platform where every bit of data, it's like you're in the room of the case every day, right? And so for the physicians at 90.6, sometimes it's not the patient's assertion or the physician who took care of the patient's assertion, but it actually can be reviewing a conversation, noting that there's actually something that both the patient and the physician missed. Because for the first time, we actually can leverage natural language processing. We can actually pull data out of the system to understand what really quality is. Because it isn't just about some of the metrics we use in systems currently are based on the fact that we don't know what is going on in those rooms between the doctor and the patient. And for us to elevate the notion of what quality is, ultimately impacting outcomes, we have to be able to observe those interactions and understand what is impacting the downstream outcomes.
And Jack, I'll add that at Catalia Health, one of the key things that we focus on is time. Not how much time each day or week that we're talking to a patient, but what's the overall duration from the first time we interact with them to the last. And that's something that we always compare to existing programs that are in place before we come in. And what we're showing is we consistently increase that patient's time on a program or on a certain therapy. So that's one way that we look at really changing outcomes.
Excellent. Anybody else?
One of the things we are measuring, not necessarily the healthcare outcomes, but we also have a lot of challenges with technology and for our patients to be able to connect to the doctors. So we actually have added a few questions in our patient experience surveys about whether it was easy for them to get on the technology and be able to connect with the doctors.
Nobody else is jumping in on that. I'll ask another one. And if we were together on a stage somewhere, I'd ask for a show of hands on this one. But the question is, do you expect telehealth boom to continue once people can go back to in-person visits? So maybe a number of people can make a quick answer to that one.
I think looking at our patient population and the response that we have received, we actually now give choice to our patients whether they want a televisit or they want to come in person. And about 50% of them are choosing to stay with the televisit. And with all the advantages of televisits, especially for our patient population, I think if the technology improves and we can continue to connect with them on a reliable basis, then I think it's here to stay, and it'll only improve.
The next thing I wanted to ask is for Sunny. You talked about Telehealth 3.0, and somebody's asking when on a timeline do you imagine asynchronous plus AI being the dominant way to handle the consultation?
Oh, that's a great question. Being the dominant way is a tough question to answer, but what I will say is that it's happening already today. I mean, I would point to even some of the solutions you heard from Cory and Brad. Maybe they'll tell you how much exactly AI is involved, but these solutions are being deployed actively today, in that the information and the data that we're gathering from the patient is processed before it even gets to the physician, so that the physician or clinician is able to spend their time more efficiently and effectively on taking care of the patient in the way that only they can do. I think if you're looking forward, when is this going to become mainstream? I point to what Alpa just shared with us, that we're already seeing significant willingness and desire from the patients to move in this direction. Of course, that's for more traditional telemedicine, but as they see the benefit of it, if you take a patient who's underinsured or uninsured and give them two choices, I'll give you an option of getting care, but having to pay $100 out of pocket, or get the same care and literally have it for free. I think that almost quickly leads to massive, massive adoption. So do I think it's going to happen in the next year or two? Perhaps not. But in the next 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, I do think we're going to see a significant increase of adoption of Telehealth 3.0.
Great, thanks. Dr. Chan, there's a question specifically for you, asking a very specific question. Is the telecare system you're using with Sutter built in-house, or is it from a vendor? And if it's from a vendor, what's your experience?
So it's through partnerships. We do many of these things through partnerships, and for example, we're actually partnering with Brad on some solutions, it turns out. So the experience is, I think we're still at 1.0. I would love to see the vision of Sunny's 3.0. I mean, I want us to be there. The technology is good, but not perfect. And I think the other opportunity, frankly, is as I think about Telehealth 1.0, it's really, we provide episodic care right now. But what do we do about those gaps in between those visits? That's the big opportunity. Because I don't know about you, I would love my guardian angels to watch over me and to look out for opportunities to care for me, even when I don't book an appointment. Like, let me reach out and take care of people. So that's what I hope to see going forward.
Somebody's asking for both Cory and Brad, with the reliance on artificial intelligence, machine learning, how does telehealth work for heart patients? Will a change in dosage involve actual doctor talking to patient, or can AI do that automatically? You want to start, Cory?
Sure. So, a lot of where we're using the AI is on the patient engagement side. How do we keep them involved in a program? How do we educate them about their condition, about their treatment? Through that, we are collecting a lot of data. Right now, we're using much less AI or machine learning on that data analysis. A lot of that is going back to the clinician. And it's interesting, going back to, kind of what Sunny's talking about and heading towards telehealth 3.0. There's a lot that we can do on the way to 2.0 and 3.0 with simply automation, using tools that we have that are well understood before we go to the AI analysis. One of the big challenges here is how we integrate AI decision making into our workflow, not only from a just pure workflow and usage perspective, but from a regulatory perspective. And we're a ways from being able to do that. There's a lot of work happening in that space, but there's a lot that we can do with that data right now that, just the right data can go to the clinician at the right time based on our knowledge of particular disease states and what needs to be viewed when. And so in all of our applications, it's still the clinician making that determination about changing a medication dosage or changing treatment direction.
Yeah, I think, in 90.6, 100% of patients are taken care of by human physicians, board certified US-based physicians. We built an AI platform to both improve the patient experience and the physician experience. So that if you go on our website, you can see the demo where the AI is asking questions and gathering information from the patient. That is a true neural network. You can put anything you want. You can say anything you want to the AI, and it will figure out what kind of questions are appropriate to ask. And then it hands it off to a physician who completes the visit. And so that is a fundamentally different approach than an expert system where it basically gives you as the patient a yes or no choice. Can you imagine being in the doctor's office and your only choice was yes or no? True AI systems allow a breadth of answers that allow, and then enable physicians to understand the physician-patient conversation in a way that provides high-quality care. And that's fundamentally different. That's how AI and neural networks can impact care. If it isn't valid in the context of the patient experience, then it's not going to work. If the patient has to feel, the patient is always going to weigh it against their brick and mortar experience. Is this similar or the same or better quality than I get if I drive, into my doctor's office to talk about getting my lipids checked? And the thing is, it's also not all one or the other. Many solutions on the AI side could support a congestive heart failure practice, could work with Cory's product, and all these things can augment each other in a blanket solution that institutions like Albert's may actually purchase, right, when they're looking at congestive heart failure programs. There's not one singular solution necessarily that can impact these, although there are companies that are building the platforms to aggregate the data in a clinically impactful fashion.
Still on AI, question for, again, both Cory and Brad. So let's go to Cory first on your view on applying AI to nutrition. Is there a value added there for the patient care system to gather data and provide advice on nutrition?
Yes, absolutely. I actually did my clinical work in endocrinology. So I spent 3 years in the clinic at Boston University Medical Center seeing type 2 diabetes and weight management patients. And that's the first place that we showed that something like this is effective. And actually the first company that I started was focused on that. I'm excited to hear what Sunny's saying about, a lot of investment in preventive care, but I think that's actually been one of the huge challenges in focusing on the nutrition or weight management or even diabetes market is that there traditionally has not been a lot of funding or willingness to pay for solutions around that space. In terms of efficacy, yes, it's there. We can use the technology that a lot of different companies are building to address those challenges, though, and we've seen that.
There's a lot of opportunity in this space. I mean, I think if you wanted to look at it from the financial perspective, Teladoc's acquisition of Livongo this year would be an indicator of shift in movement and belief, and contextually around coaching and more wellness directed technology, right? And that's a massive market in that acquisition. And so it's a great indicator of shifts in the market, but they're not alone. I mean, Omada, there's many companies that are doing highly impactful work, not just in the diabetes space. And I think the opportunities are there, certainly in nutrition. And the key feature is creating a system that allows a good data set to go in to provide information that the patient finds valuable about their nutrition.
Thanks, Brad. Here's a question I've been asking myself for 28 years, and now somebody in the audience is asking it. And it's, why did it take a pandemic to happen for us to adopt telehealth? And why was it so slow? Let's go. If we were sitting on a stage, I'd say go from left to right. But looking at instead our promotional photos, let's start with Cory and ask you, why did it take so long? Why a pandemic?
Well, there are a bunch of reasons. I think one of the things that's changed under the pandemic is the regulatory and reimbursement side of this, right? And for better or for worse, that drives a lot of what's happened in healthcare. There are a lot of people who have been freed to make the decisions, in my opinion, to use this kind of technology. And, it's advancements that have been happening over decades that we're now suddenly seeing put into practice very quickly.
Yeah, I think Cory hit it on the head. What's interesting, I think, in the market is we're seeing a shift back. If you look at the CMS data towards in-person care, which is interesting, we'll need to observe that shift back to find out what the right balancing is between in-person versus virtual care. But I think it's certainly here to stay. I mean, I've talked to many patients who, you start to ask questions of the patient once you've had an experience on telehealth, virtual care that's really satisfied your needs. Why do I need to go in to get my lipids checked? What's the purpose of the annual physical exam? Like there are reasons for these things, but patients are going to be asking questions and trying to right size their in-person care versus virtual options, certainly. And that hopefully that will lower cost and increase access.
You're right. Dr. Chan?
I mean, I agree with Cory and Brad. I mean, it was sort of the perfect storm of all these factors, the alignment of need, the alignment of incentives, and frankly, our willingness, it seemed like the right time for us to really reinvent ourselves in some ways. And so it's horrible to think we needed a pandemic to do it, but on the other hand, there are tremendous silver linings as well. So I think we should just frankly savor those.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Brad, Albert, and Cory said. Basically, necessity is the mother of invention. And once we didn't have a choice, we figured out, and it's on both sides, right? It's not just that medical professionals were reluctant, and of course, having the reimbursement piece aligned helped medical professionals switch. But also, I don't know how eager patients were to adapt to telehealth. And now with shelter in place and people really worried about even getting out of their house, and especially coming to a healthcare setting where all they see is really us teeming with virus, that, both sides have really accepted it and embraced it.
I think it's been well covered why, but maybe I'll add one perspective from how I look at things is that COVID didn't actually necessarily fundamentally change the dynamics. It acted as a catalyst or as an accelerator. If I heard Albert correctly, I think they had a plan to roll out telehealth, but they planned to do it over 2 years, had to do it over 4 weeks. But at the end of the day, that plan was always there. We always knew that we were moving in a direction of having telehealth be more available, more accessible to patients. And what something like COVID does is just massively accelerates that adoption rate. And now we'll see how it ends up playing out. I think Brad mentioned that we're seeing a little bit of slide back to more traditional visits, but I think there's going to be a core nexus of telehealth that's going to stay, and we're going to build on top of that. So allowing that acceleration to still persist.
Question about asynchronous. It's something we haven't talked a lot about in the past. I think those of us in the field for the most part have felt that was kind of the old way to do things. For example, sending a text message or an email to the doctor and then getting a response in 48 hours was less good than having a face-to-face visit. But as you move toward asynchronous care, do you also move from patient asking for a service or more to a push model where the telesystem reaches out to the patients? You want to talk about that? As opposed to a pull model, I guess, a push model where you're reaching out to try to proactively on the medical side make changes for the patient.
Happy to touch on that. I think that you can see both in the model. There are solutions where if you're feeling ill, you may pick up your phone, go to your app, whether it's 98.6, something else, and then say, hey, I need to see a doctor now, and send them a message. I actually don't think the 48-hour wait is common anymore. You probably get a response back in minutes, if not maybe a little bit longer. But there's also an opportunity to do the other side of that. Albert mentioned this, is there an option to have that guardian angel watching over you all the time, assuming that that's what you want. Today, the average middle-aged adult sees a physician 4 to 6 times a year. Is there an opportunity to really cover the other 359, 360 days a year where you're not seeing a physician? And that's where I think that there's an opportunity for very cost-efficient telehealth to fill that gap.
And we also want to comment on that?
Well, I'll just point out that many of us have been practicing virtual care for a long time. We just didn't call it virtual care. So when you think about our patients who are using our patient portals, when we measure the emails that are coming in, for example, we're getting millions of emails a year from patients, and we're taking care of them. We are sending alerts and reminders for their chronic disease management needs, for their preventive care needs. So when I actually looked at a broad definition of care, I think we were 50% virtual already. And the challenge has been, how do we support that going forward? How do we support that in a way that continues to meet patient needs, but does not burn out our doctors, which has been a problem heretofore?
Thanks. Well, a question here for Brad. Somebody's asking, text message-based care can drive big gains in efficiency and access, but today it only covers a small subset of medical conditions. Will this be a limiting factor, or do you think that all non-procedural care can be delivered over text?
I wouldn't say that I believe that all text care could be delivered over text, but I could say over having been doing this for 4 years now, the vast majority of patients in 98.6 prefer text. So if you ask our entire cohort, which is millions of patients, what they prefer, 98% of patients select text as their choice of communication if given the option. That's what they do, and they talk to their family members. That's what they're comfortable with. And it also allows them to engage physicians in non-traditional settings, both synchronous and asynchronous. So, one of the things we're always challenging ourselves with is to reimagine what those limitations are. We will never sacrifice quality in the context of driving technology forward. And the good news is we don't have to. We can continue to evolve and drive more and more aspects of chronic care onto a text-based platform. And even if it covers 70% of the needs of a patient, that's 70% more than they had before. And that scalability allows us to really impact, as Sunny was saying, with this sort of vision around 3.0. We have to lower the cost. If we want patients to have access to primary care medicine in the United States, we have to lower the cost to increase access. We don't have enough primary care physicians to deliver the care. So we have to scale the physicians in a way that's allows this care to be delivered in a way that's manageable for the country. And so this has to all interplay together to be successful.
Terrific. Thanks, Brad. I'm going to wrap it up there. It's time to talk about switching over to the breakout rooms. We have it set up for each of the panelists to be available in the breakout room. You'll be going over to another website that Nathan will tell you about in just a moment, where you'll be able to log on to any of the six of us, I guess, or you can join a breakout that is more of a mingle and network sort of room where they'll also talk about volunteer opportunities with VLab in case you're interested in that. So I want to thank everybody involved in this, certainly the panelists, the audience, VLab, our team, and I'll say good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you to all of our panelists and to our hopeful that many of you can stick around. We're going to move over, and there will be a link in the Q&A link to the place to go, and I'm going to tell it to you right now, and then you'll see it again on screen. So it's going to be vlab.org/network. So it's a short URL to the Zoom meeting, and then we will have it on screen for you in a second if you actually need the number. So that's the best way we can get off of this webinar mode where you can't interact with each other to a set of breakout rooms where the panelists will participate. Bob, I don't quite have, there we go, thank you. How to get involved. So you can get involved at our next planning meeting, which is on Tuesday. It's the first Tuesday of every month. We gather much more interactively and meet to organize the next topics. And you get to be effectively almost a scout for that part of the industry and find the panelists who should come and participate in our next big disruptive event. So there's that way to get involved. And then you can also donate. And we'd love your support VLab, tax-deductible donation. And if you're interested or your company is interested in being a sponsor, we do sponsored events. And that means that you can have your company get the main billing. And we'd love to have more sponsor support in the next year. So let's get to our breakouts. And again, a huge thank you to everyone. Here is the link. It is vlab.org/network. And there you have the meeting ID and the passcode. So I will see you there in a little bit, and I'll be in a volunteer-themed breakout room. And I think a lot of our panelists will each have their own breakout room, and we'll have some of our volunteers in those as well. So we will see you soon. Thanks, everyone.